Raymond, the last guitar. He said to the black girl, "You can't afford that $100,000 guitar." So she picked up the $100,000 guitar, sat down on a stool in the middle of the store, and played it. But before that, before the silence that stopped everyone in their tracks, there was a man in a gray cap in the corner of the room who had been watching everything from the very beginning, and no one realized who he was. "You can leave now." Derek King said this without even looking up from his computer. 42 years old, suit without a tie, hair combed with the precision of someone who is genuinely terrified of looking unkempt. Manager of Harmon Strings, the most expensive music store in Nashville, Tennessee. The kind of man who judged a person's entire worth by the condition of the soles of their shoes. And Maya Ramirez was wearing worn-out sneakers, faded jeans, a backpack with duct tape stretched across a broken strap. "I said you can leave." This time he looked up. What Maya saw in his eyes wasn't anger. It was something far easier than anger. It was effortless contempt, the kind that needs no justification, that exists even before a person opens their mouth, that had probably been there long before she walked through the door. She was 18 years old. It was a Tuesday in October, and she had crossed 4 states by bus to stand in that exact spot. "I want to see the guitar." Her voice came out firm, firmer than she had expected it to. Derek stood up slowly, with the deliberate unhurry of a man who wanted you to understand that his time was valuable and yours was not. He walked around the counter with the air of someone doing you an enormous favor just by existing in the same room as you. He stopped 2 meters away. He crossed his arms. "You don't have the money to buy that guitar." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a judgment. It was a verdict, delivered before any evidence had been heard. 3 employees stood in the store. 2 customers browsed at the back of the room. Everyone heard. Not one person said a word. Maya didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She didn't reach for her phone or her words or an excuse. "I didn't ask you the price." A small, tightly controlled flash of irritation crossed Derek's face. He was used to intimidating people with silence, with his stature, with the atmosphere itself, the soft amber lighting, the instruments suspended in glass display cases, the thick burgundy carpet that muffled even the sound of footsteps, that swallowed sound the way wealth swallows accountability. The entire store had been designed as a statement, a quiet, expensive declaration that certain kinds of people simply did not belong here. "Young lady." He lowered his voice, but not quite enough. Not enough so that the people around them couldn't hear. "That guitar is worth $100,000. I suggest you leave before I call security." It was precisely at that moment that Maya saw him. In the farthest corner of the room, almost hidden behind a tall display of effects pedals, there was a man. He was sitting on a low stool, wearing a plain gray cap and a simple black jacket, a coffee cup cradled in both hands. He was watching the scene with an expression Maya couldn't immediately name, not amusement, not discomfort. Something quieter than either of those things. He didn't intervene. He didn't rise from his stool. He didn't do anything at all. But he didn't look away either. Maya turned her eyes back to Derek. She took one slow breath. Then she walked toward the wall where the guitar rested on display. The small brass sign read, 1962 Gibson Les Paul Custom, $100,000. Do not touch. She didn't touch the guitar. Not yet. She pressed her fingertips gently against the glass of the display case. Slowly, the way you might press your hand to a window when there's someone on the other side you haven't seen in a very long time. "I need you to leave. Now." Derek's voice had developed a new edge, sharper and more brittle than before. Maya turned to face him, and for the first time since she had stepped through the front door of that store, she smiled. "Do you know the name of the luthier who built this guitar?" Derek said nothing. "I knew you wouldn't." She unslung her backpack from her shoulder. She reached inside and removed a yellowed envelope, folded carefully in half, and placed it on the glass counter without a single additional word. Nobody in the store understood what was happening. Not the employees, not the customers, not even the man in the gray cap, who had finally, quietly, set down his coffee and risen from his stool. The envelope had a name written on the front in careful, deliberate handwriting. Raymond Ramirez. Derek looked at the envelope. He looked at Maya. He did not touch the paper. "What is this?" "A letter." Maya shrugged with one shoulder. "From the man who built this guitar." Silence. "Raymond Ramirez died 6 years ago," she continued in the same steady tone one might use to comment on the weather outside. "He was a luthier, 23 years building instruments. This was the last guitar he ever built. That doesn't change." "No, but it says something about me." The man in the gray cap had moved. He was now approximately 5 meters away, pretending with imperfect conviction to examine an effects pedal on a side shelf. But Maya could feel his attention in the air between them, thick, like barometric pressure before a storm moves in, heavy with the weight of someone paying close and careful attention. She let it go, for now. "My father built this guitar," she said. "It took him 14 months. He sent me photographs every single week, every step, every detail, the raw wood, the glue drying under clamps, the frets being set one by one. I used to stay up late just to see the updates come through." Derek's brow pulled together. His expression attempted skepticism, but underneath it, poorly hidden, something else had moved in, something closer to unease. When he finished, he sold it to a collector in Atlanta. Maya's voice remained level, even, carefully controlled. "He said he was going to use the money to pay for my music school." She paused for exactly 1 beat. 2 months later, he died in a workplace accident. No one moved in the store, no one spoke, no one even seemed to breathe. "I spent 6 years tracking down this guitar, Atlanta to Memphis, Memphis to St. Louis. Now it's here." She looked at the display case, at the dark honey-colored mahogany behind the glass. "I didn't come here to buy it. I came here to look at it." Derek held his silence for 3 full seconds. Then something in his face closed off, the way a window slams shut when the wind catches it. Whatever had briefly softened in him retreated behind something colder and more familiar. "That is a very beautiful story." Beautiful. The cruelty had returned to his voice, more deliberate now, more calculated. "But it doesn't change anything. You have no way to prove any of that. Not in this store. Not today." Maya looked at him for a long, unhurried moment. Then she turned to the man in the gray cap. Because he had stopped pretending to look at the pedals, he was looking directly at her. There was something in that face, an expression that Maya had only ever seen once before, in an old concert video she had watched hundreds of times as a child. A live performance from 2009 in which a guitarist played a solo so staggering, so completely unlike anything that had come before it, that the camera had physically shaken because the cameraman was laughing with the pure, overwhelmed joy of someone witnessing something they couldn't quite believe was real. Her heart dropped half an inch inside her chest. But she said nothing. Not yet. The man tilted his head slightly, almost imperceptibly, as though answering a question she hadn't spoken out loud. Then he looked at Derek King. "Can I talk to you for a second?" His voice was calm, almost casual, but it carried something underneath the calm, a particular kind of quiet authority that doesn't need to announce itself, that people simply respond to without fully understanding why. Derek stared at him. For the first time since Maya had entered the store, the manager looked genuinely, visibly uncertain. With me? With you. It won't take long." Maya watched the two of them move away together toward the back of the store. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see Derek's face from across the room, and she watched it change, confused, then tense, then a different color entirely, something between the gray of embarrassment and the white of a man realizing the ground beneath him is not as solid as he thought. One of the employees approached Maya with careful steps, a young man, 20 years old at most, with the look of someone who had watched the whole scene and hadn't quite decided what to do with what he'd seen. "Can I get you some water?" he whispered. Maya almost laughed. It almost broke through. "No, thank you." She turned back to the display case, to the guitar. The mahogany had that dark honey color that only comes from wood that has been alive for decades, that has absorbed time itself into its grain. Maya knew that exact shade. There was a photograph at home, the only one that remained, in which her father stood holding a piece of that same raw wood, smiling directly at the camera with sawdust caught in his hair and scattered across both shoulders like pale snowfall. She hadn't been able to look at that photograph for 2 years. The heat rose in her throat. She swallowed it down. At the back of the store, Derek King had gone very still. His shoulders, his hands, his entire posture had taken on the shape of a person receiving information that retroactively enlarges the size of a mistake they had believed was small. His name was Marcus Young. Not that anyone in the store would have recognized him. He had spent years carefully stepping away from cameras, declining red carpets, giving almost no interviews. He had built a life that existed largely outside the frame, but anyone who truly, deeply loved the guitar knew the name. 5 Grammy Awards, a career that music critics had described on multiple occasions as a private conversation between one man and his instrument. 47 years old, born in Memphis, he had performed on stages across 3 continents before stepping quietly away from public life 2 years ago. Not from bitterness, not from exhaustion, but simply because he had said what he needed to say, and silence felt more honest than repetition. Maya knew who he was because her father had spoken of him. "Marcus Young is the only guitarist who makes my guitars sound the way they're supposed to sound," she had once overheard at the age of 10, pressing her ear to a door while her father spoke on the phone in the next room, his voice carrying that particular register of admiration he reserved for very few things. She hadn't understood it fully at the time. She understood it now. Derek returned alone. His face wore the specific expression of a man who has just been told something he did not want to hear and is still in the early uncomfortable stages of processing it. He stopped in front of Maya. He was quiet for a moment longer than felt natural. "I need to review the instrument's documentation," he said finally. The authority had gone out of his voice. What remained was something flatter, something administrative. "Go ahead," said Marcus, stepping up quietly from behind. Maya looked at him directly for the first time. He was taller than she'd expected. There were calluses on 3 fingers of his left hand, the particular kind that never fully heals, that becomes a permanent feature of the skin after decades of pressing steel strings against frets, day after day, year after year, until the body simply accepts it as part of itself. He extended his hand. "Marcus, I know who you are." She shook it anyway. "Maya, Raymond's daughter." It was not a question. She stopped breathing for a full half-second. "You knew him?" "He built my first custom guitar." Marcus looked at the display case. A quietness settled over his face. Not this one, a different one, but the same hands. Something in Maya's chest, something that had been braced and locked for years, sealed against the pressure of being opened, moved, shifted. The way a door shifts when the latch finally gives. She kept her expression composed. "He never told me." He was that kind of humble. A pause. "I heard about the accident. I'm sorry." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that people who share a specific kind of loss sometimes build together, a stillness that acknowledges without trying to fix, that holds space without demanding anything be placed inside it. Derek returned, too quickly to have meaningfully reviewed anything. "There are some provenance issues with this instrument that we need to examine." "What issues?" Maya asked. "It's routine." "Derek." Her voice was flat and clear as still water. "What issues?" He looked at her, and then, for the first time that entire afternoon, he looked at her the way you look at a person. Not at a problem standing in the shape of a person. Not at an inconvenience wearing a backpack with duct tape on the strap. A person. And he began to speak. What Maya learned in the next several minutes overturned everything she believed she understood about why she had come to Nashville. When Raymond sold the guitar in 2018 to the collector in Atlanta, the sales contract contained a clause. Raymond had insisted on it. He had learned over 23 years in the trade what the market for rare instruments could do, how quickly provenance could be buried, how easily the story of a thing could be stripped away from the thing itself and sold separately or simply discarded. The clause was straightforward. In any future resale of the instrument, Raymond Ramirez's daughter held the right of first refusal, first to be notified, first to buy at the same price offered to any other buyer. The guitar had passed through 3 separate owners since 2018. The clause had been ignored in all 3 transactions. Harmon Strings had acquired the instrument from a dealer in St. Louis 4 months prior. The store had known about the clause. It was present in the provenance documents, written plainly, without ambiguity. The decision had been made to complete a private sale quickly before anyone thought to ask the right questions. Maya looked at Derek without blinking. "You knew." Derek said nothing, but the silence was its own full confession. Marcus stood still beside her. There was something in his expression, the worn, adult anger of a man who has seen enough of the world to no longer be surprised by it, but who still feels the impact of each new instance, as though something in him refuses to stop caring. "Who was going to buy the guitar?" Maya asked. Derek hesitated. "Who was going to buy it, Derek?" The name came out slow, deliberate, like a key turning in a lock. "Gerald Holt." Maya didn't recognize the name. Marcus closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When he opened them, something had settled differently in his face. "Gerald Holt has been acquiring rare instruments for 30 years, Marcus said. His voice kept low and even. "He buys them to possess them. Most of the guitars in his collection have never been played since the day they left the store. They sit in climate-controlled rooms on glass shelving behind locked doors. He owns 3 instruments that belong to musicians who changed the history of this art form, and he has never once allowed anyone to play them. Not a student, not a colleague, not anyone." Maya absorbed this. "Did he know this guitar belonged to my father?" "Gerald Holt knows everything about the instruments he chooses to acquire." A pause. "Including the people who built them." What Marcus did not say, what he left in the space between sentences, Maya understood with complete and immediate clarity. Gerald Holt had sought out this specific guitar precisely because he knew about the clause. He had known about Maya. He had paid above the market rate to Harmon Strings with one condition attached, that the transaction be finalized before any heir could be located. Before any daughter with a worn backpack and a long bus ticket arrived asking questions. It wasn't collecting, it was erasure. The last guitar Raymond Ramirez had ever built would disappear into a locked room. No one would play it. No one would hear it. No one in time would remember it had existed at all, or whose hands had shaped it, or what love had gone into those 14 months of photographs sent late at night. Maya stared at the display case for a long, unmoving moment. The dark honey mahogany. The pickup her father had tuned by hand, by ear, with the patient precision of someone who understood that the difference between good and right was a distance most people couldn't hear, but he had always been able to feel. The serial number carved carefully into the interior of the body, she knew it was there even without seeing it. She had memorized it from one of the photographs. Then she turned to Derek. "The clause gives me the right of first refusal. The instrument is still in your possession. The sale to Holt hasn't been completed." Derek looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him with an expression that did not contain a single ambiguous element. "It still is," Derek said. His voice had gone quiet in a way that had nothing to do with volume. He walked to the display case. He drew a small key from his jacket pocket. He unlocked the glass. The 3 seconds that followed were the longest of the entire afternoon. Maya held out her hands. The guitar was lighter than she had expected, and yet it carried the weight of everything she knew about it. 14 months of photographs, her father's voice on a recorded phone call she still couldn't listen to all the way through without having to stop and look away from whatever she happened to be looking at when the feeling hit. She carried it to the stool where Marcus had been sitting. She sat down. She positioned the instrument the way she had been taught, the way the muscle memory in her body had stored and kept and guarded for years, and she played. It wasn't a test chord. It wasn't tentative or exploratory or searching for anything. It was as if her fingers had already decided before she consciously did, as if something in her hands recognized something in the wood, a conversation that had been waiting 12 years to begin. The luthier's voice finally emerging through his daughter's hands, exactly as he had always said it would. The sound that came from that guitar filled the entire store. One of the employees stopped mid-motion, a polishing cloth frozen in his hand. The young man who had offered her water stood with his expression completely open, entirely unable to arrange itself into anything neutral. Derek King leaned against the empty display case with his arms loose at his sides, and he didn't say a single word. And Marcus Young, who had heard every great guitar that had been played in the last 3 decades, who had stood on stages in front of crowds of 50,000 people and played until his fingers bled, who knew what this instrument was and what it could do and what it meant, stood completely, utterly still for 45 seconds while Maya played. 45 seconds without blinking, without moving, without doing anything at all except listening with every part of himself he had. She played for 4 minutes. When she stopped, the silence that followed was of the kind that falls after something that cannot be taken back. A customer near the back of the room had been filming on his phone. Maya had not noticed when he started. Marcus crouched slightly, bringing himself level with her. "Did your father teach you?" "Since I was 6. Maya's voice had changed. It was smaller now, truer. He used to say that a well-made guitar carries the luthier's voice even when it's sitting silent. That the instrument tells the story of the hands that made it. Marcus was still for a moment that stretched longer than felt ordinary. He was right, he said. Maya's eyes burned. She did not break, but she came very close. The video went live that night. The customer had posted it to Twitter with the caption, "I have never seen anything like this in my life. 6 hours, 3 million views, 12 hours, trending in 4 countries. It wasn't only the sound, though the sound was extraordinary. It was everything surrounding the sound. The context that spilled into the comments section as employees from the store confirmed what had happened before the camera started rolling. The story of the father. The story of the 6 years and 4 states and a clause written by a man who understood that love, unprotected, could be taken. Maya had not slept when the phone began ringing the following morning. A journalist, then a record label, then a documentary production company. Then, at 11:47 in the morning on a Wednesday, a number she didn't recognize. It was Marcus Young's office. What he proposed was simple, an instrumental album, guitar solo, no vocals, no ornamentation, no production layered over the sound to make it into something more impressive than it already was. Just her hands and the wood and 60 years of a guitar that had been waiting for exactly these specific fingers. The title would be her father's name, Raymond. Maya accepted without pausing to think about it. There was nothing to think about, but first there was the matter of the guitar itself. The attorney contacted the morning after the visit to Harmon Strings took less than a week to confirm everything. The right of first refusal clause was legally valid and had been materially violated in 3 consecutive transactions. Maya had full standing to contest ownership of the instrument. Gerald Holt reached out 2 days after the video crossed 10 million views. Not through the lawyer, directly from his own phone. The call lasted 8 minutes. At the end of it, Holt agreed to transfer the guitar, not because of legal pressure, not because of the public attention, not because any of it had become too costly or too complicated to manage. Maya learned the real reason weeks later from someone close to him. Gerald Holt had watched the video from the store 18 times in succession. On the 18th viewing, he had closed his laptop. He had sat in a darkened room for a length of time no one had measured. And then he had picked up his phone and called his son, a man he had not spoken to in 3 years, and said whatever it was he needed to say. No one knows what passed between them in that conversation, but the following morning he called Maya. The guitar arrived in a box lined with protective foam and wrapped in a soft gray flannel cloth. There was a handwritten note folded inside. "It should have gone to you first. I am sorry." Maya read it 3 times. She folded it carefully. She placed it inside the yellowed envelope alongside her father's letter, the two pieces of paper finally occupying the same space, finally held together. Derek King was let go 4 days after the incident. Not because of outside pressure, not because a campaign demanded it. The owner of Harmon Strings was a woman named Carol Harmon, 71 years old, who had built the business over 4 decades from something small into something respected, who had strong and specific ideas about what that respect was supposed to mean and to whom it was supposed to extend. She learned what had happened from a phone call with her own daughter, who had seen the video on a Sunday afternoon and called her mother immediately. Carol closed the store for an entire day. When it reopened, there were new customer service standards in place and a simple sign installed at the entrance. "Everyone is welcome here." Maya found out about it through Twitter. She read the words. She was quiet for a moment, sitting in the particular stillness of someone absorbing something that lands differently than expected. Then she picked up her guitar and played for 2 hours without stopping. The album Raymond was released 18 months later. It entered the top 10 in 23 countries in its first week. Critics wrote about the way the guitar sounded, how it seemed to carry 2 voices simultaneously, the one playing and the one that had made it, intertwined in the wood itself. In the week of release, Maya gave one interview. The reporter asked what she wanted listeners to feel when they heard the album. Maya considered the question for a moment, not performing consideration, actually sitting with it, actually finding the answer underneath everything else. "That someone built that with love," she said finally. "And that love doesn't disappear when the person leaves. It stays tucked away somewhere, folded into the wood, waiting for the right moment, the right hands, the right room." She paused. "It waits as long as it needs to." The guitar rested in its open case beside her during the interview. The dark honey mahogany catching the light, the same grain her father had touched, the same instrument that had traveled 6 years and 4 states and through the wrong hands and through a locked door and through a man who changed his mind on the 18th viewing of a 4-minute video filmed on a stranger's phone. The same guitar, finally home, just as it always should have been, just as it always, in some patient and persistent way, knew it would be.